So, and as we have discussed before, also when it comes to digital assessment, there is a shift, or there was a shift in pedagogy. And now specifically, there is a shift from, you see, something that is called assessment of learning or summative learning to something that is called assessment for learning formative. You will also see that definitely depending on your specific learning objectives, because also here we need to make sure that there is a clear match between our digital exam modes and our learning objectives that we are trying to assess, maybe either or, so assessment of learning or assessment for learning, but the likelihood might be also high that we are trying to assess both. And also here, it can't be mentioned too often enough. We always need to remind ourselves that the technology is just a means to an end. So what matters continuously is a pedagogy, and the technology should actually support us in reaching our pedagogical aims and also objectives. So if we are starting with this formative assessment, another term could be that we are trying to find out whether or not our students are actually ready for these in-class meetings. So whether or not they are ready for our face-to-face meetings. And these should be constantly assessed, because we shouldn't simply believe that because a student is ready today for a class, that he or she will also be ready in the future for the classes. But we know this from our own teaching experience. This can change much depending on what we are actually trying to learn, or what kind of skills and competences we are trying to develop. So it should be an ongoing checking to make sure that the students, hopefully all our students actually will, at the end of the course of the programs, in the position of the relevant knowledge and methods. So to check this, or for this check-in, or for this formative assessment, here you see what matters now is that we are trying to understand whether or not the students, our students, have built the relevant knowledge, the relevant information. And ideally, you remember what we discussed beforehand, ideally the students have studied the material we have provided in the form of videos or whatever. And also not only to checking whether or not they have learned it, but also to check whether or not they really understood the key concepts, the key terms of relevance. And if not, this kind of check-in modes give us as a lecturer, a teacher, the opportunity to correct any misunderstandings as soon as possible. And you see, here are typical methods to for initiating this check-in stage. We could do polls. And definitely we could also think of having weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the duration of the courses, quizzes to test not only, you see, the engagement level, but specifically also the understanding of our students. And here you also have the typical tools we can apply for these checks, for these polls or the quizzes. From there, we can actually move to this summative assessment. So now we have reached more or less the end of a specific learning unit. We have reached the end of our course, and now it's about the final proof. Here you see if we are addressing again our bachelor students. Now we have to think about suitable assessment tools that gives us an idea whether or not the students have really developed the core competences and they can also apply the theoretical concepts we have addressed. You see, typical formats for the final proofs could be so-called e-exams. So these are simply traditional exams taken on a computer. Definitely, we could also think of take-home digital exams, and they are typically done in an open book scenario. And here you see as well some kind of tools that provides this opportunity to have these exams in that way, like Moodle, Canvas quizzes, ExamNet, or Inspira. When we are thinking of the concrete content of the digital assessment, here the idea is that we are creating exams that comes as close as possible to the real world, to the challenges working professionals, organizations are exposed to nowadays, and this is also something we should expose the students with during the entire studies. And you see, in order to learn about how the students are doing, how the students are developing, we could apply these digital portfolios, because they give us a very nice overview of the development over time. Let's say here you see a 3-year degree program. We could also include or use as forms of examination peer-reviewed group works, and to see how collaborative our students are, certain students are, all students are, how they are working in the group. Hopefully they are collaborating at all in the group, but let's think in a positive way. And then also here you see, as a form of examination, and specifically with this link to a real-world challenge or real-world challenges, we could also ask the students to prepare videos in which they explain how specific concepts could be applied to a specific challenges, organizational challenges, but depending on the discipline you are representing, this video could also be used in order to give the students an opportunity to demonstrate how they are proceeding a specific lab procedure. Then, for those of us who are having these large cohorts, and definitely we know that grading is typically very time consuming and also very resource consuming. It's also very consuming to provide feedback, not only to groups, but ideally maybe also to the individual students. Here too, there are nowadays tools available that actually gives us the opportunity to provide this instant feedback, but also to turn into auto-grading, and this could be supported by pre-specified rubrics, and then the tool would actually check whether or not the student submissions are aligned with these rubrics, and then grade accordingly. Here you also see examples of tools that can be used for automated feedback and or grading. We do have GradeScope, but also LMS rubrics. You know, these are the built-in tools we see with in Moodle, Canvas, or Blackboard. Then there might also be some participants here in this classroom who teach STEM subjects, or whose assessment requires some kind of technical moments. You know, it's typically a challenge to assess the math, specifically the mathematical skills, the coding skills, as well as how the students actually came up with this specific solution and not with another one. As we have highlighted before, here also the recommendation would be that we are moving away in our assessments, that we are moving away from asking for the final answer, but asking the students for showing us the entire process that led them from A to the solution. Here too, there are tools available. You see, we have again GradeScope, which is tools that assist the grading of handwritten math and codes. There is Mobius and Stake, as well as Wolfram Alpha. So here too, measures are available. Then we need to go back to this academic integrity and what we can do in order to ensure that this is that we are in compliance with it. You know, the likelihood is high that the students use LMMs for addressing, for solving a specific exam, for solving a specific exercise, but we do have some kind of strategies available to decrease this kind of likelihood. You see, from a technical point of view, we could think of implementing or using so-called lockdown browsers so that the students cannot switch windows during their exams. We could also think of AI monitoring, so that protocols are being created which helps us to understand or to verify the identity of the student or the students. From a pedagogical point of view, here too, we do have some strategies we could apply so that we are coming closer to this ungoogable, or here you see AI resilient design, as already mentioned, emphasize hyperlocation so that our exams make clear references to specific topics, to specific aspects we discussed in our on-site classes, in our face-to-face classes. The exams could take advantage of local news or campus, department, university specific data. We could also ask the students for personal reflections, how they think that what they have learned could also be later used in their professional career, but also how these kind of tools, these kind of methods they have learned can actually support them as a person, as a private person. And you see, the main message is that in our exam we are turning to current events, because, and here you see currently the events from the last 30 days, because then we all know that the likelihood is higher that this hasn't been incorporated in these in the current LMMs. And also, again, this should be stressed that we are moving away from this result-based training to this process-based grading, not training, sorry, process-based grading. And so, for example, we could break an essay, even a thesis, into a couple of smaller stages to really see the progress over time, and you know, these outputs of these different stages can then maybe delivered in the form of videos or whatever, or in presence. So if we are going back to these AI resilient questions, here, as this is more or less a repetition, but this is a very important aspect. So we should emphasize in our exam question this personal aspects, emphasizing a process-oriented way of assessing, and also think of, instead of having just, let's say, one final assessment, divides the assessment into several smaller assessments, so that we also support this process-oriented way of thinking. And in case, I don't know, maybe you are using plagiarism checking tools when students have to send in or submit their project reports, their theses, and for example, some of you may use Turnitin, and definitely Turnitin also gives us idea about the AI score, and we could also use the outcome actually of this check to have a starting point of discussion or conversation with the students to say, okay, what are maybe the possible consequences of working in this way. So you see, we could use the output of such a kind of plagiarism checker not only just as a penalty tool, but really as a starting point for discussions. And definitely also here, depending on what form of assessment is due, different tools will work, or as we all know, tools, as always, tools have their strengths and weaknesses. So we should have a kind of good understandings of these strengths and weaknesses. And this table actually gives us some ideas about what tool to turn to, depending on what is of interest. So you see, in case we would like to assess the engagement level of our students, we could turn to Mentimeter or Poll Everywhere. If it's really a kind of an exam that is a high stake one, so it's critical, let's say, for moving from the first year to the second year, it's critical for actually getting the degrees, then we could think of including tools like ExamSoft or WiseFlow for those teaching the STEM subjects. As we have mentioned already, Mobius or Stack could be tools to go. And if we would like to assess collaborative skills, we could take advantage of Miro as well as Google Workspace. And as we know, there are definitely additional tools, but just to give you some ideas. And again, we need to go back to the aspects of accessibility and inclusion, also or specifically in an exam environment. So to prevent that this digital divide is even widening, we need to always double check that all our students have access to the relevant hardware, and also at least a stable internet connection. And as we said already, also when we are in the process of drafting our exam exams. It should be based on this universal design for learning. So you see what is supported or what is emphasized here is that all the tools we are using are WCAG compliant, which actually is an abbreviation of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We need to make sure that in case we know that some of our students only have unstable internet connections, and we are in an exam setting, that in case the internet connection goes down, that they can still continue with their exam then in an offline mode. And also, as we mentioned before, we need to make sure that in case needed, that extra additional time is provided, so that all students, depending on their conditions and depending on their expectations, can actually complete the exam as good as possible. So we have reached the conclusion slide and maybe possible next steps for you. So main message specifically of this slide or this unit was that now examination is doable through a new variation of tools. We can actually say that now we as a lecturer, we as a teacher have new opportunities available to assess the learning process of our students, and maybe for you as possible next steps or a little exercise in addition to what Talshyn presented before. What you could definitely do is that you audit one of your current assessment format, and you try to identify the bottlenecks of this format, and then maybe select one of the tools that were presented on slide 11, and maybe try to pilot it in one of your upcoming semester.